Put on this computer. Okay, I think we're all set. And participants are coming in, which is fantastic. And we're going to kick off here. So we have actually, I think it's our third IMOS Voices, Visions, and Advocacy talk on COVID. Clearly, there's a lot of information that needs to be out for people to learn from, particularly mothers, which is the focus of our organization. And I wanted to welcome everybody who's coming in today. We had an amazing turnout once again in terms of interest level and questions that have come in and everything like that. We originally intended only to do one talk on COVID, and the second one that we did was on current research, but so many questions came in about not only the research that was kind of trickling out about employment patterns and stress levels and everything like that. We also just had a lot of questions of how do I do this? How do I manage to have kids at home that may be on a hybrid schedule? I don't even know what their schedule is going to look like. I don't know what my work schedule looks like. And I think for several of us that are here today on the panel, we're right there with you. My kids, I have 3 of them that are going back this week on a hybrid schedule. And it really feels like every day is playing it by the hour, not even, under good circumstances, you're hoping to do kind of a week plan, and I don't think we're there yet, at least not in our family. So we wanted to have this panel put together of people that are experts in parenting, are mothers and advocate for mothers in their professional lives and personal lives, to offer support. I think some of us are really looking for just a sympathetic ear and sort of to know that other people are going through this with us, but also from some nuts and bolts advice is what I've been calling it, of just sort of how do you get through the hour by hour, but also get by into sort of a week mode, hopefully, while keeping your kids happy and hopefully feeling somewhat secure and having some sense of groundedness in our own lives, which I think is feeling pretty challenging right now. So nobody's prepared us, obviously, for what we're doing right now. But I think one of the big challenges is that we are feeling sort of disconnected from a lot of the usual communities that we've had set up, villages, however you may want to call your own group, whether it be family members, friends, even schools that oftentimes provide additional support in various ways. And so we're trying to hack it out and do all of it ourselves, which is tricky for sure. So we have 4 guests with us today. We have Desiree Israel, Dr. Kelly Ann Nelson, Sarah Rosensweet, and Dr. Michelle Tishi. And these experts will hopefully act as a North Star during the next hour and afterwards as well. We will be addressing screen time, mom guilt, spousal conflict, and being a single mom. And that's based pretty much on the questions that have been coming in over the past couple weeks from you all. I hope that you'll make use of the chat box, which should be on there's an icon on the bottom of your screen if you're on a regular computer. If you're on a phone of some sort, there's a more button on the bottom and you can click that and that'll give you your other options in terms of either the chat box or the question and answer box. And you can submit any questions or comments or anything like that that you may want to share with people. And with no further ado, I think that covers the basics for us. We're going to introduce Desiree Israel first. She is a licensed clinical social worker, therapist, herbalist, certified breastfeeding specialist, and trained birth worker with more than 10 years experience in perinatal mood disorders and reproductive justice. She is also the co-founder of the Perinatal Mental Health Alliance for People of Color and a partner of the Bloom Collective, a collaboration of maternal and birthing persons, health and wellness practitioners serving Baltimore City. Desiree is devoted to the liberation of Black mamas and families of the diaspora by using African-centered modalities and rituals to achieve holistic wellness. So the first question that I'm going to kick things off with each of the panelists based on questions that had come in, but you're more than welcome to ask questions yourself that we will circle back to after each of the panelists has had a chance to talk. So one of the questions I have for you, Desiree, is what is the best way to advocate for assistance from parenting partners, employers, and wider support networks? And that's based on the fact that we have a lot of single mothers that really feel like their employers are not doing enough or not being empathic enough, as well as partnered women who feel the same. But it's also, there's some spousal conflict going on. So how do you sort of reach out to those communities when we are sometimes sheltering in place and feeling like it may not be healthy to have the typical sort of relationships that we have with other people?
Right. So thank you, Katie. So I like to start with my own experience first, because I am an unpartnered parent, well, co-parent. I don't consider myself a single mother because I do have a plethora of people that help me to raise my children. I have 2 sons, and with myself and their father, we had to really facilitate better communication. And that meant more schedule sharing, something we had never done before. Putting everything on a calendar and sharing our calendars together. Those do full-time working with teen moms in a foster care system. And I had to be clear with my supervisor, like, I'm not gonna be at 100%, especially since our schedules changed with caring for the children. And, you know, we went from one schedule to every other week. We both have them more. So when I have them, expect less from me. And luckily, having a job that understood that and being a family-centered practice as well, working with foster care, kind of had to be. But I've worked with moms and parents that don't have that flexibility, and it was really pulling into more virtual support for them, whether it's getting to know your neighbor. A lot of people had not talked to their neighbors before. Even with my children, there's a little girl across the street that we had never knew before that comes over now and plays with them. But being able to have those transparent conversations with supervisors and creating, I think this is a question that you'll ask later about pod culture, something I had never known about before, but definitely creating those little pods of people that, you know, there'll be some safety precautions and everything, but having a trusted community, virtual community especially, and that those transparent communications with supervisors is very important.
And how do you see the COVID, sort of the changes that have resulted because of COVID impacting the women that you're working with?
Surprisingly, and I get this question a lot of my clients have not been COVID related, or even it was more so people had more time now to seek therapy. So now like they're seeking therapy. So I had not seen that directly. It has affected my teen moms more than I've seen a lot with them experiencing friends and family members that have passed. But in my work in therapy, it has not come up as much.
Great. I mean, that's a good thing. I mean,
It's a good thing. I'm really surprised. So.
And how do you think that you're sort of feeling yourself in all of this?
I'm glad that I've been able to manage as well as I have. I'm not from the Maryland area. My family is in New York. So I haven't seen my family in several months. That's not the norm. I go home. I haven't been home in over a year, but my family comes down here often. So we've been able to manage well throughout everything.
Good. It sounds like you're living sort of the, you know, best case scenario considering the circumstances sort of thing.
Yes, as my therapist would say, Corona bonuses. There have been many Corona bonuses. I hate to say that, but there really has. I'm glad to be covered and safe. We did have one close family friend pass from COVID back home, but otherwise my family is safe. My grandmother just retired after 62 years, so it's been really good for my family and just to be still, a time of stillness.
There has been that. I mean, and I think that's the sort of, you know, with my kids are ranging from 9 to 14. So, and Kelly and I were talking about this last week, that we feel like we're in a very different situation than some of the people that have very young kids at home. So then you're facing a whole different set of challenges when you have, not to say that it's easy with older kids because you have a different set of challenges, obviously, but you're not in that constant need mode and the constant sort of on and just watching them all the time and not having that relief or having somebody come in if your child care center is no longer open, those sorts of sort of built-in infrastructure that a lot of us had already had in place. But with that, I'm going to ask Kellyanne. But first, I'm going to introduce you. Dr. Kellyanne Nelson brings 25 years of experience in education and mental health to the US, Caribbean, and Qatar, to her role as head of education for Nurture Me Global in Doha. Through education, coaching, and support services, Dr. Kelly helps parents adopt research-informed practices to create positive collaborative relationships with their families. She also works with educators who are interested in learning about educational leadership, intercultural competence, and non-punitive models of discipline. So Kelly, we spoke last week about how you lead workshops for moms of teenagers in Qatar. And I was hoping that you might be able to highlight some of the challenges that you see mothers facing with older kids and what might be specific to the spaces that you're working in currently versus what you see as sort of universal issues that might apply outside of your kind of geographic specific experiences.
Yeah, so here in Doha, we are a country of about 2.7 million people. Roughly 15% of those are citizens of the country, and the rest of us come from all over the world. And certainly there are people that were born here or have grown up here, but they are not eligible for citizenship. And so my neighbors, the people that I interact with every day, and the women that I work with are really from all over the world. And a vast majority of us are, like Desiree said, we're living in places where we don't have extended family for support. Now some people do. Like I said, there are non-citizens that have lived their whole lives here and are multiple generations here. But for the most part, most of us have moved away from family to come here for work or education opportunities. And that really, means we have to rely on each other in a different kind of way. I think, high expat immigrant populations, we tend to build communities and networks that look a little bit different than when I lived in Los Angeles or Miami or Dallas. I think with teenagers in particular, here, the local context is we went down on lockdown in the middle of March and things tightened up really quickly, really fast. And if you were driving, you could be pulled over by a police officer asking you where you're going, why were you outside of your house, where, was it essential business? And so, so in some ways that kind of control over teenagers was a little bit easier. Now, I don't personally believe in having control over my children. I definitely am more along the influence way. But a lot of the challenges that I've seen online are, my teenager is leaving the house, and you can't pick a 15-year-old up the same way you pick your and bring them back in the door, right? Like it's a whole different skill set. So I think, some of the challenges have been when parents have been using this kind of reward and consequence sort of parenting model. What can you take away? like what kinds of you're already grounded. What kinds of consequences could be? And so I've seen parents of teenagers have to really shift kind of how they are managing expectations in the household. Particularly, obviously expectations that aren't getting met. When expectations are met, there's no problem. So when the expectations aren't being met, I've seen parents really have to dig into a whole new set of skills where they really are relying on influence and relationship rather than control or rewards or punishment. And so that's some of the work that we do in our business Nurture Me, is kind of talk about how do you do that? What does that look like? But I think that's been a big challenge. And then also certainly the kind of the social isolation combined with, what could be endless amounts of screen time.
So in terms of screen time or other elements of, sort of I think, Many of us have seen some behavior changes, not always for the better when our kids, and some, you know, aren't, you know, they're clearly stepping up and dealing with something that we didn't have to deal with when we were younger. So both sides of that, of course, but what does that look like, or what would you advise moms to do to sort of move into that influence mode rather than a control mode?
Yeah. So I would say if you have concerns with screen time, and really I think this is for any age or any human in your life, right? Other human being in your house, and you have concerns about how much screen time, including yourself, right? It starts with, it's not about screen time, right? It's not about the device. For the most part, staring at a phone all day is genuinely, is just not harmful in and of itself. Right? Looking at your phone. I mean, you can talk about eye fatigue and those sorts of things, but really it's not harmful by itself. But when you think about what is it getting in the way of, right? So my kids have unlimited screen time, but we protect sleep. Now their sleep schedule, because they're teenagers, has shifted later, but they are still getting, you know, 9.5, my younger one, so my kids are almost 15 and 12 and a half. So they're getting between 9 and 10 hours of consecutive sleep at night in evening time. If I had problems with screen time impacting their sleep, I would talk about it from that framework, from this is how many hours of sleep your body needs. If I had concerns that we have a no screens at the dinner table rule, right? A lot of people have that. If I didn't already have that rule in place, and I found that my teenager was bringing their device to the table and not engaging in family conversation, I would talk about not engaging in family conversation. I wouldn't talk about the phone at the table. That's the symptom. You know, what my expectation is when we eat dinner, we have a conversation, and that dinner lasts at least 22 and a half minutes, right? Like, is, and how screen time or devices are getting in the way of that expectation. Because I think as soon as you, and this is where it's more specific to older kids, as soon as you start with, you're spending too much time on your computer, you're spending too much time on your phone, the whole conversation dissolves. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. Prove it. How do you know? Right? I mean, my kids are like, prove it. What's the science to back that up, Mom? I'm like, okay. Actually, the science says you need X number of hours of sleep, and I love you as a human being and want to have a conversation with you. So when you approach it from those perspectives, rather than making it about the screen or the phone, I think the conversation, one, it lasts a lot longer, and you're able to really talk about, you know, what the actual issue is. Certainly there's conversations about types of content, right? Those sorts of things. But I think sometimes we go into that conversation and it's like, I want to limit my kid to X number of hours of screen time per day. Okay, why? Right? I mean, that's what your kid is going to ask you. So if you haven't really thought it through about what your actual concerns are, you kind of wind up in this false debate over how much is too much.
I think I've had that conversation, actually. I'm nodding along as if, you know, oh yes, that's absolutely what I'm doing, and I'm not at all. But one of the other things, and I think Sarah and Kelly, you both have some overlap in this kind of more, I don't know if it's even necessarily negotiation-based, but conversation-based parenting that is trying to remove the control and trying to remove some of that from the relationship that can oftentimes become rather antagonistic, even with little kids. You know, it's do this, no, you know, that sort of thing that goes on. So you're a certified peaceful parenting coach, speaker, and educator, and the parenting advice columnist for Canada's Globe and Mail newspaper. Sarah lives in Toronto with her husband and 3 big kids who are 13, 16, and 19, and says that peaceful parenting is a non-punitive, connection-based approach that uses firm limits with lots of empathy. Sarah works one-on-one virtually with parents all over the world to help them go from frustrated and overwhelmed, which a lot of our questions reflected frustration and being overwhelmed, I think, to we've got this. And you can find out more. I don't know if maybe you want to post this later, but sararosensweet.com is the website that you can find out a little bit more on that. So I love the idea of peaceful parenting. I don't know if I'm living peaceful parenting, I have to be honest, or really finding much peace in general right now. I think I'm sure that you've seen that peace is not sort of the external in terms of everything being calm and happy, but finding peace in you. And there's some sort of, beautiful saying that I've entirely mangled right there. But peace being kind of elusive, I think, for a lot of us right now. How do you see peaceful parenting as achievable when we have so much sort of conflict and unease? Certainly in the United States, we're facing a lot of different issues on political fronts, but even with just focusing specifically on COVID, a lot of changes that people are likely uncomfortable with, and pushback regarding masks or what kind of school schedule that you're supposed to be on, and kids sort of, I think, picking up on some of that tension, and we're part and parcel of that whole picture too. So what do you tell moms in terms of how to recalibrate, I guess?
Well, it's interesting. I've never really thought about peaceful parenting in the context of, politics or the pandemic, but I think just struck me when you were saying that one of our big mindset, or one of our big things that we believe, and for some people it becomes a mindset shift, is that everybody's doing the best they can, which I really think is helpful to think about in terms of the political divide that we're seeing, at least especially in the United States. And trying to see people as not bad, but there's something that's happened that's brought that person to that place, right? And I think that that's really what we look at in peaceful parenting. What we look at our kids, like if our kids are acting up, there's a reason for it, right? Because generally, we as humans, we want to be in like harmonious, connected relationships with our people. And if we're not, there's a reason for it. So peaceful parenting really, when I say talk to moms who are going through hard times right now, the only thing you can really control is your own reaction to your child, right? So the big thing that we start with looking at is how can you calm yourself when you're upset, and whether it's because you're super stressed because you're working from home and you've got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and blah blah blah. Really, that piece of self-regulation is a great place to start. And it doesn't mean that everything has to be perfect before you can self-regulate. It means that even when things are going completely haywire, you know how to calm yourself. And so I think that's really helpful to think about right now, especially with all of the external frustrations and challenges that parents are facing. And just quickly, we always start with stop, drop, and breathe. So when you feel yourself getting upset, you just stop whatever you're doing. You drop your agenda just for that minute, whether you're trying to get your child to leave you alone while you're, doing your work, or, get ready for bed or whatever. Just drop your agenda for a minute and just take a deep breath, because that deep breath is that signal to your body and it's not an emergency. And that's what helps you calm yourself, right? So that's something that I think everyone could put in their back pocket for all the times things that we're experiencing right now, and what might change this winter, and whether we're going to be back in lockdown or whatever. Just remember that stop, drop, and breathe. Peaceful parenting doesn't mean you never get upset, because that's completely unrealistic. It just means that you try to calm yourself when you are upset. So, and I think that could apply to all the things that you mentioned, the politics and mask wearing, and everybody, let's just all stop, drop, and breathe, because I think the world would actually be such a better place if people could remember that. Stop, drop, and breathe. Everybody's doing the best they can, and let's relate to each other from that perspective.
And so how does your peaceful parenting, and I realize that the segue is setting this up in a bad way, but how do you sort of move that into a relationship with a co-parent? And not that you are parenting your co-parent, that was the bad segue there, but yeah. I think that there's certainly a lot of frustration in terms of how domestic labor and childcare and all those things are getting split and worked through between both couples that are cohabitating, but also those that aren't. So how do you sort of apply those things outside of the parenting framework?
Yeah, people always say you should do a peaceful partnering class or something, because really all of these, all the big ideas of peaceful parenting are relationship ideas, right? It's not specifically about parent and child, it's about a relationship. And in peaceful parenting, we start with connection and empathy. And I think that that's also something to remember in your partnership is, and for me, that's been my journey, is like, you know, my husband doing, have used all the strategies that I teach parents with kids, to use that in my marriage as well. And, you know, once I started doing that, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, very consciously, my husband said, "Have you noticed how well we've been getting along lately?" I was like, yeah, it's not a coincidence. But really to start with that, they're doing the best they can, trying to have compassion and empathy. And we have to remember that empathy doesn't mean that you agree with the other person's point of view. It just means that you try to acknowledge their point of view, even if you don't agree. And you have the most influence over somebody, whether it's your child. And I love when Kelly was talking about influence versus control. You have the most influence when you feel connected with somebody. So if you're having a lot of conflict with your partner, the way to make things better isn't with more conflict, because I mean, maybe you guys have had a different experience, but I've never been able to solve anything from a fight, right? Like whenever you're in a fight with somebody and you're in conflict, conflict just rises. So how can you reduce the conflict? By finding more connection, whether it's with your child or your partner, and even your co-partner or you know, co-parent if you're not together. Hopefully you can find something that you like about that person if you were together with them for long enough that you had kids together, and really try to come to them from a place of empathy and compassion. And I bet you a lot of parents listening right now are like, well, you know, why do I have to do that? Like, they're a grown up, right? Like they're a grown up. Why do I have to do this? It almost feels like mothering our partners. And I would say, you know, if your partner or your ex partner or co-parent had learned the things they needed to learn when they were children, you wouldn't have to do it. But you know, they're lacking skills. They're lacking skills, and so sometimes we do have to do more than our fair share of giving compassion and empathy. But it really, that's the only place where change comes from.
It's a very admirable approach. As somebody who wears her feisty pants a little too often.
You know what though? It makes me feel better. Like it makes me feel better. I feel like it's almost a selfish approach, because when somebody is being difficult and I think that person's really just having a hard time, they're not giving me a hard time, that actually makes me feel better to give them that grace. And it makes it so it's not about us, right? It's not about me. Like they're having a hard time, right? It's not personal. I'm not taking it personally. So I hope that will maybe help you. It's not as, I just want to say, it's not as like saintly as it sounds. Like it really is. It can be hard, because you really have to give up a lot of your ego almost, about being right. You know, you have to let, you know, somebody once said, you can be right or you can be happy. But it's not saintly. It's just a little bit of a mindset shift. It's made me a happier person.
I'm glad. I hope other people are able to adapt what you're saying too. I think that it certainly makes sense. And it seems like it's doing well for you. So thank you for that. So Dr. Michelle Tishi is our final panelist, and she has a PhD in educational psychology from the University of Minnesota. She graduated with an emphasis in positive psychology, human development, and social psychology of education. With over 16 years of experience, Michelle works as a professor, teacher educator, mentor, coach, and consultant to parents, schools, and institutions. She is a proud mother and stepmother of 5 children, ages 19 to 6. Her vision professionally and personally is for every child to be honored for who they are and supported in developing their unique gifts and talents from the moment of birth. So I am going to field for you the most asked question I think that we've gotten out of all the different people that came in with, you know, a plethora of concerns. And that is, how do you work at home while your kids are not only there too, but may need additional support from us? So obviously we can't clone ourselves. And we are, I appreciate what Desiree was saying in terms of having a supportive employer. I think that goes a long way. And some of us have that, some of us don't. But I think no matter what, we're feeling really torn right now between what our professional obligations might be and what we know is needed from us at home, and just simply not having the bandwidth or the hours or anything to do that. So what are some of the strategies that you advocate for?
So I'm going to start with a very personal this morning story, because I live in Florida. And although I could allow my children to go back to school face to face, we are in the worst state, in my opinion, in the world related to the pandemic. So they are both going back virtually, the two that live with me, who are 6 and 16. So the 6-year-old obviously is going to need help the first day of school. And I had this event, so I had very clear boundaries around how long I could be helpful with him and the computer and the first grade virtual classroom. My 16-year-old junior totally thought she was set. Turns out 10 minutes before first period, she's locked out of the brand new iPad they issued her. And so I spent the first hour of my morning juggling between tech support for the 16-year-old and trying to make sure that my 6-year-old actually would engage with the laptop that he would rather be bouncing off the walls this morning than doing that. So this is like, yes, very real, very now, but I had boundaries. Like, this is like, I can help until this time, at which point I am very blessed to have a partner, and he's mostly helpful in these situations, who could step in. Luckily, the first grade teacher was also very convenient to me. They had their lunch break at 10:35 a.m. Eastern time, which allowed me the grace to hand off the 6-year-old to the husband and move into my space so that I could be here for this workday. So one of the things that I advocate is first really understanding what the needs are. And I was not like Miss Super Organized, I'm gonna micromanage everyone before the pandemic, but since we all have been pushed into this world, I realized that one thing that helps me, and I think is really helpful to a lot of parents, is really understanding where the needs are for your family. So I knew that the first day, for the first couple of hours of them going back virtually, we were gonna have to be hands-on, both hands on deck from both my spouse and I. And then I really need to micro schedule us so that I know that at these specific moments, I'm offline from the family and completely in my work zone. This summer, I actually taught an intensive, 2 back-to-back intensive college classes that were evening hours. So I was on the screen for 4 hours straight, and other than my breaks, I wasn't gonna be helpful to anyone. And so really being upfront about expectations and capacities. Now, when I'm doing more informal meetings with students or doing things that are more entrepreneurial in nature, I have different ground rules. And we've really worked on that this summer, because I've been working crazy hours this summer trying to get my new business off the ground, as well as continuing to work as a part-time professor. And so there's been a lot of balls in the air. And so I've tried out a lot of the ideas that I suggest to parents, and really being clear about those moments when your kids need you, period, end of story, that are predictable. So what happens when it's not predictable? So what we have to do in those moments is find ways to lean into that moment, into our children. A lot of what Sarah and Kelly were talking about actually fits very well with what I suggest to parents, which is we don't want to move into power struggles. This is about really being able to work with the energy of the situation, peacefully engage the fact that your child just fell down the stairs and you're in the middle of a live meeting. Okay, well, at this point, my child's need is more important than the meeting that I'm on, and I'm going to do my best to look professional, but still take care of what's actually essential in this moment. but it's not a one size fits all thing. You know, I'm lucky. I have flexibility. I have the capacity to set ground rules around my own work. There are a lot of people who don't have that. My youngest sister actually is a 4-year-old, and she's a VA social worker. And so when they allowed her to start working from home, she had to be able to keep her 4-year-old the heck out of the space while she was having confidential meetings with vets. And 4-year-olds are much harder to manage than even 6-year-olds. So that's a lot of negotiating and really understanding your own kids, understanding yourself, and finding ways to set boundaries without being rigid about stuff.
So how do you, I mean, one of the things that I read an article on recently and have been experiencing myself is that particularly my youngest, but I think all of them just want more check-ins with me, are just sort of clingy. They just want me more. And I want to be supportive. I want to be part of that. But then it's also not only is, you know, care work is work, but also I have other work. So how do you, when it's not somebody's fallen down the stairs, but somebody wants the 5th hug in 10 minutes, you know, sort of thing. How do you sort of manage those mental health security aspects?
Yes. So our kids are anxious. And one thing I like to tell people I work with and my future teachers I work with is kids are more like us emotionally than they are like us intellectually. And so they feel all the stress and all the anxiety and all the craziness of this moment in history that we're all living through. And so that's part of what goes into trying to balance our work as whatever we do professionally with our work as mothers and caregivers and nurturers. One strategy I have, and my 6-year-old is very much that clingy, he would like to be in my lap 24/7 type of kid. He and I, at least once every hour, hour and a half, depending on my teaching schedule, I just give him a hug and a kiss. And I'm like, how are you doing? You doing all right? Anything I can do for you right now? And make sure he knows that I'm there and that if push comes to shove, mommy's got his back, so to speak. My 16-year-old is very independent at this point, which is really good in a lot of cases. But when she needs my attention, she often needs it urgently. And so we've been trying to navigate how do we make sure that we do check in with each other enough on a daily basis so that it doesn't become a crisis where she's in tears because her friend was really obnoxious on social media or in their virtual class together. So almost like really mindfully being clear about how we can check in with our kids. And each of our children is going to be different, not just because of age, but personality and emotional demands are different from child to child. And one thing overarching all of this that I really recommend to all of us as mothers is remember that we have to first put our own oxygen mask on. And so make sure you actually value self-care and mindful moments, even if it's 1 minute to breathe again, to come back to your own body. We are somehow getting through all this, right? This is a crazy set of circumstances. We need to validate that for ourselves and find time to return to our own centers so that we can give our best selves to our children, to our work, and to our lives.
I like that idea of sort of preemptive conversations rather than always being reactive. I remember in one of our past talks, somebody mentioned nobody ever asks nicely when they're in an emergency for help, you know, sort of thing. And I mean, whether it's our kids or ourselves, but having that sort of trying to predict as best we can during unpredictable times, of course, what's coming down the chute and sort of lining things up ahead of time. Yeah. I like that. So we are going to open up the chat box and the question and answer box and all the different ways that you may want to engage with the panelists here. And while you're thinking of your very, very best questions, I'm going to kick off one more that any of you can answer, or all of you, however you want to go about that. Mothers are especially impacted by COVID, with economic disadvantages likely getting more substantial as women face layoffs, considering quitting or scaling back hours, or just feeling like they can't do everything their employers expect in light of the additional demands at home. So how can you experience and drive change in policy, organizational practices, or other broad changes to create greater equality for moms?
So I think, Katie, you and I had a conversation last week to kind of, just brainstorm a little bit. And I think one of the things that has stuck with me since then is for those of us that don't have 4-year-olds at home, right, who don't have kids that really need us a lot, we need to be leveraging our own privilege, right? We need to look around at the moms who have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old at home who are drowning, just drowning. And those of us that have that extra capacity, we have to step up right now. Right? We need to take on extra projects. We need to volunteer for stuff. We need to reach out to those moms and say, which part of your job, our coworkers, which part of your job is just not possible for you right now? And figure out, is that something that I can take, and can we trade? Right? Can you take part of my responsibility for the fall and I take part of yours because my work schedule allows it or my flexibility allows it. And we also need to, speak up for those that have less social capital, right? If you have tenure or you have seniority, we need to be going in and advocating for the things that other moms need, even if we don't need them. We have that capacity to do that, and we really need to step up. And I think for those of us that don't, that don't have that social capital or they don't have the tenure, we need to look around at our, our colleagues in our communities and figure out who does, and kind of be brave and reach out and say, you know what, Katie, I know you're this, can you help me, right? Can we go in together with a plan? One of the comments was about, navigating, how do you talk to your supervisor about what is sustainable and what is possible and what is not? And some people have great supervisors and you can really have that conversation, but not everybody does. So is it easier for you and I to work out this plan and go in with a solution? Here's our problem and here's our solution. But I think part of it is those of us that have the ability and the capacity, we really have to step up now.
Definitely.
I would love to jump in on this quickly as well. I'm going to be a little cliche, and also in the US especially, we need to also, on a big scale, step up and start demanding systemic change. The United States is the most quote unquote developed country on the planet that lacks any type of paid family leave. We do not have maternal leave or paternal leave. When babies are born, we don't have adequate sick leave. We have policies and infrastructure in this country that are absolutely abhorrent. And we absolutely must, with our votes, with the ways that we communicate with politicians and other thought leaders, we need to start making this an essential issue on everyone's radar. Not just people who are moms, not just people who have been through it. We need everyone to understand that this whole country, the US, will collapse if you don't have the moms who are holding it up. And because of that, we need real infrastructure change, and we have to do it now. And I think this goes along with a lot of the other social movements right now. It's essential and it needs to happen immediately.
So this was not a planned plug, but I'm going to show you. IAMAS is kicking off a postcard campaign right here. And if you scroll up in your chat box, there's a way to contact me and the information that you need to provide, which is basically just a mailing address, an email address so I can send the directions and how many postcards you would like. And it says, women vote, moms need you to close the wage gap for women, secure paid leave for all, offer subsidized childcare, and health equity for all as well. So, and this is, I'm gonna see if I can zoom in a little bit on that. It's reversed, of course, but I think, you put your mirrored brain on, you can figure that one out.
Katie, I don't think it's actually in the chat, just so you know.
Oh, maybe not. I'll try to repost that. But we have a couple other questions coming in, so I do want to get to those before we run out of time here. So as any advice for a graduate student, I think this applies really to anybody with a young one and a first-time mom to an infant. How do I keep going when I don't have any outside support or a male advisor who gets it. And certainly, I mean, I think any of us who've been in grad school know that it can be a real anti-family establishment. It still is, even in sort of what you would consider sort of female-dominated academic fields. It's still sort of, Kelly and I were talking about this a little bit before too, but I think even if we stretch that out a little bit into sort of where people might be in just traditional employment that just doesn't quite get what's going on the home front, particularly for people with tiny ones at home. How do you manage that?
I'm jumping in again because I had my daughter and became a single mom while finishing my dissertation. And so I love this question, and I say, be an advocate, don't be afraid, stand up for your rights as a human being with a dependent infant. A lot of people don't get it, and they think they can get away with their patriarchal nonsense attitudes, and they really need to understand that women can do a lot of amazing things, but we need spaces created so that that is possible. And you know, I want to cheer on people who are graduate students and in positions where they can try to be advocates for themselves and future others. And I finished my dissertation with a baby on my breast, so I figure we can all we can all find ways to navigate these spaces, but we have to get over our own fear of being our own best advocates.
So another one of the questions, what I find really hard is when my 4-year-old twins are home because the daycare is closed on Fridays and I'm on the phone, which is something that happens a lot in our house as well. At least there are 2 of them, so they occupy themselves quite a bit. But when I'm on the phone and they need something, how can I make them understand that I can't respond to them right away without them feeling I'm neglecting them, their needs, or that I don't take what they want or needs seriously? And there's lots of mom guilt. So you may want to approach that from sort of what we were saying, nuts and bolts, or the mom guilt side, but obviously they both are entangled there. Sarah?
I have some tips. One is hopefully you have some advance warning when you're going to need to be on the phone. And if you can really fill them up, spend 10 minutes doing like some laughter and roughhousing with them and really fill up their connection cup before you have to be on the phone. I think that's really helpful. And that was a tip that I was hoping to give to everybody who's working from home and have kids at home. If you can, you know, in Peaceful Parenting, we have a tool called Special Time, which is one-on-one time with your child, you know, 10 or 15 minutes. I'm all yours for the next 15 minutes. What should we play? Kind of thing. It might not be possible to do special time if you have 2 small kids because they won't leave you alone, but you can at least do, and I'll put a link to special time. I have a free ebook about special time that I can put in the comments. But if you have more than 1 child, just get everybody laughing, do some roughhousing, like some silly games, and that's really, really going to build connection. When we laugh, we actually create we create oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone, and we create endorphins. So that's my first tip. And my second tip is, you know, Dr. Kelly was talking about screen time. If you know, save your screen time for those most important times when you're on the phone, right? It's like strategizing and prioritizing. Okay, I really, really have to not be interrupted for this Zoom call. Who wants to watch a movie? And you know, and it's never my first go-to. But if you really need, you know, uninterrupted time, that's often the only way to get it with 4-year-olds, because 4-year-olds still in their brain development, they don't have impulse control yet, right? So their kids don't actually start to develop impulse control until between the ages of 5 and 7. And that's just purely brain hardware development, right? There's, you know, some kids who are maybe less spirited will seem like they have better impulse control, but that's just because they don't have the impulses that the more spirited kids have. So really just know that they, you know, again, they're doing the best they can. If you tell 4-year-olds that they can't interrupt you, it's going to be really, really hard for them not to. And so that's why I say fill up their connection needs. And then finally, don't feel bad about it if you have to, you know, actually my daughter just walked into the room and I gave her the hand. It's like, go away, right? I'm on a call. And, you know, there are times where we can't meet every need that our child has, and they might want us to pay attention to them right now, right then, that moment. But really, you know, we can be good enough. And I think I read in somebody's description that, yeah, about being a good enough mom, right? We don't have to be perfect. And in fact, if we were perfect, our child would never have any opportunities to develop resilience, right? To experience difficulty and make it through to the other side. So you could have some 4-year-olds who are upset that you can't pay attention to them right exactly in that moment. But that's okay, because we're all doing the best we can, and you can't, you know, perfection is not our standard here, right? We're going with, sometimes it's damage control. You know, and as you were talking about that too, Dr. Mitch, like, who needs what's the most important thing, the kids falling down the stairs or the meeting that you're in? And sometimes it's hard decisions like that.
Yeah,
To what Sarah said, the last point especially to get rid of the mom guilt, we have to normalize that we are crisis parenting right now.
Mm-hmm.
They're still in an active pandemic. And just like Sarah, you know, I give my sons the hand, they're 8 and 6. So they know when my door is closed, I'm doing something. But I know that door is going to open at some point. I know they're going to want a hug. If I'm in a Zoom call, I will tell clients as well, if I'm in a meeting or, you know, seeing a therapy client, please excuse my sons might come in, you know, they're not going to share confidential information, obviously, but they're like, oh, it's okay, we understand. Like, you have to normalize that this is what we're in right now. So don't feel guilty. If your 4-year-old comes in, just excuse them, excuse the person that you're on the phone with. Like, I apologize, but other than that, it's normalized crisis parenting. This is our normal right now. So.
Desiree, I love that you said that, and I think everybody's gotten way more understanding about that in the past 6 months, right, or 5 months, or however long it's been. I was listening to a podcast with some women who are powerful film studio heads, and they were talking about being on a Zoom call with another powerful female film studio head, and her daughter her 7-year-old daughter came and interrupted, and they were all like, whew, you know, it's just like everybody, it's like the great equalizer, right?
I think we all remember the BBC guy, right? And
yeah.
It was, you know, the national news that this guy's talk was interrupted. But I mean, the fact is that the vast majority of people have kids. So, I mean, this is the fact that, I mean, I really, you know, as somebody who's advocates for moms so much and everything, I love the fact that you were talking about Corona bonuses earlier, you know, that we are sort of taking down that sort of, you know, thick metal wall between public and private, because I am not going to get into the full lecture on how that came to be, but we're not in a place where that should be, particularly, you know, as with technology, people are just in and out of work in a more fluid way. And, you know, our home lives are part of us, you know, and I think that's one of the things that I'm hoping takes much deeper root in terms of systemic change and how that looks. So I think we might have time for one more question here. And it's, what can we do as parents to help ease any anxiety around COVID in general and returning to school that we may see arising in otherwise pretty laid back kids? Mine are 4 and 6, and I'm now seeing behavior changes such as sleepwalking and waking. So I don't know who wants to take this one, but whoever wants to chime in is great.
I'll start, but I'm sure that all of you have valuable things to say about this. I would start with simple, like with 4 and 6-year-olds especially, we're dealing with this early childhood brain development. They need us to help them believe that they are safe in the world right now. And the reality is, as Desiree and Sarah reiterated, we are living in a crisis. And so we are crisis parenting. And part of that also has to do with the emotional energy that our kids are getting from us. And so what we can best do for them is to find time to be as grounded and mindful as possible so that we can give them the opportunity to feel their feelings, but not have them fester and manifest in ways that are harmful to themselves or other people. And teaching them some mindfulness strategies themselves. You know, breathing and simple yoga postures and even dancing can be beautiful mindfulness practices for little ones. They do it in preschools and kindergarten. We can do it at home.
Can I make another plug for laughter? Laughter is so great. Laughter actually, if you have a kiddo who's anxious, laughter is huge help, because laughter actually clears our bodies of all of the stress chemicals and hormones like cortisol and adrenaline that build up, and that's what gives us actually that anxious feeling. That's why lots of adults, treat their anxiety through exercise, because it flushes the body of those chemicals. So if you have a kiddo who's anxious, I often say, I'll give a prescription. I'll say 10 minutes of laughter in the morning, 10 minutes of laughter in the afternoon, and that really helps to decrease kids' anxiety, and ours too.
I see this book on your
Yeah.
shelf also.
Yep.
So, in our house, so my family, our first language is sarcasm, right? So this does not work for every family, but we joke that my husband and I's parenting method is the mock and scorn method of parenting. My kids are fully on board with that, right? But it is really, it sounds awful, but it is really humor based. It is about making light of, what are you going to do, right? Laugh at it. It makes you feel better. But I think, what you were talking about, both of you were talking about with that anxiety. And then there was also a question up there about when you get angry. All of these are skills that we are able to model for our kids, right? So they're anxious, we're anxious, right? If we are hiding our anxiety in our bedroom and only talking about it with our spouse, our kids don't understand that it's really normal to be anxious right now. It's normal to be worried about some things. And when we talk through that about our own worries and our own concerns, obviously at an age appropriate level, right? And not all day long, but in small doses, we talk through that thought process of how you think about something, how you stop thinking about something when you're spiraling, what kinds of strategies work for you. And, and talking through like, gosh, sometimes when I'm really anxious and I'm thinking, it helps if I do this. It helps if I go play Candy Crush for half an hour. I've also tried baking, but that doesn't work for me, but it might, right? And helping them see that you have to try out a lot of different things to find what works for you. And so we're modeling that. And when they're, when you're upset and they're following you down the hall, and they won't leave you alone. I mean, I relate to that for sure. I had a very relentless, persistent kid who I would just get so angry with her, and I desperately needed time away from her, and she was like glue following me through the house. And all I could do for her was model what that's like. So I would verbalize my thought process. I'm really frustrated. I'm trying to get some time alone because I feel like if I had some time alone, I might be able to calm down. But you're following me. You must. I really need some time alone, right? And I'm just narrating exactly what's happening. And then, and say, I'm going to try taking a few deep breaths and see if that makes me feel better, right? Again, narrating exactly what I'm doing so that, one, it keeps me from spiraling down. Why won't she leave me alone? Why won't she go away? If she would just go away, right? Focusing on what I know works and modeling that for them. And I think we can do that with anxiety, with anger, with lots of other things.
So this final question is for everybody. We talked at the beginning of this seminar that we were going to be talking about nuts and bolts. So what are some action steps that any mom can do, either on behalf of herself or other moms, that will hopefully make the world a little bit of a better place for everybody right now? So what's something, and it can be big, small, in between, what can we do right now?
I'd say first, adapting a village mindset. Just as a Black woman and serving Black Indigenous people of color, we've kind of lost way of our ancestral ways of being in relationship with our community. And I know it seems hard to be able to connect, but there are so many virtual spaces out there for moms that it's more than I've seen that's ever been available in person at this time. So finding out what local mom groups are in your area, find your people. Every mom a support group every Wednesday from 1 to 2. And I have moms in there from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Maryland, and people that would not normally connect with each other. And it's a good, safe space, specifically for new mothers, but we also do offer a support group on Thursdays with my partner, Tanaylan Harris, also virtual, on courageous parenting. So I'll leave that information in the chat box and people can connect with the Bloom Collective on our Facebook page. But find your people.
And I will take the information, not everything that's in the chat box, so don't worry if there were any kind of more personal based questions, but the sort of advice and links and that sort of thing that people had posted throughout this, I'll have that on Facebook later as well. So, but did somebody else want to chime in?
I think just give yourself some compassion. And, you know, actually, one of my favorite resources for self-compassion it's selfcompassion.org. It's Kristen Neff, who's really wonderful, and she has some like 15-minute guided meditations that you can do that when you're feeling like you're having a really hard time, to give yourself some kindness. I wrote a blog post about how we're often our like inner mean girl instead of our inner best friend, and just to be your own inner best friend instead of lying in bed at night beating yourself up for everything that you did wrong that day. Give yourself some compassion. And of course, we're having a hard time right now. This is, you know, this unprecedented times and unprecedented expectations on mothers when there already were way too high of expectations for what mothers could do. And so I think just really like be your own best friend, and, you know, and have that voice in your head, be kind and compassionate rather than telling you that you're not good enough.
Yeah, I agree with you know, all of that. I think that giving ourselves grace is so important right now, and you know, and lowering our expectations, for goodness sakes, right? It's okay. Like, we are all, I mean, because of where we are clearly high achieving, driven, you know, thinking about our potential, all of that kind of women. We don't have to be that right now, right? We can lower our expectations. We can remember that this is temporary. We can reset family norms later on. But I think, you know, the idea, there's a really, and I can't remember who it is now, but she talks about the difference between parenting and being a parent, right? That parenting is really this kind of modern thing, as something that you do, a job. And I think if we can reframe that from a relationship perspective, we are a parent. Focus on, right? Like, we don't spend our day spousing. Might be a spouse, right? I don't spend my day childing, even though I am the child of a woman. And so I think sometimes that reframe too of like all of these expectations, even before the pandemic, have really led to this high stakes kind of parenting as an activity, as a job, as a full time, we have to knock it out of the park. And I think the more we can reframe you know, our expectations on ourselves and give ourselves grace and not have to be perfect, and to let some of those expectations go. And, you know, for goodness sakes, if my kids eat cereal for dinner tonight, that is not the end of the world, right? And I'm not going to beat myself up over it if that's what has to happen today. So I just think there's so much room to give ourselves that grace and latitude that Sarah was talking about.
I would just add to all of this wonderful wisdom, just to remember our expectations for ourselves, not just about being mothers, but also about our professional roles, because I saw that we have a live question from someone worried about ruining their career as a professor, and they have a 2-year-old. And what I say to that is higher education can learn, just like every other industry on the face of this planet, that mothers are essential on more levels than just their jobs, and that they will actually offer more to the institutions that they work for and the businesses they work for if they're offered loving support. And the best way to do that is that we allow ourselves the space to do what we need to do and be authentic and aligned, because everyone will do better if we have a world where mothers are seen as valuable in the complexity of their role on this planet. So thank you.
That. And there's certainly the research out there for those of you who are researchers and in academia, in terms of when institutions support mothers, how much more is given back in terms of not only loyalty, but productivity and all of those things, that when you're not living in fear of what might be coming at you, that you really, that your mind and your spirit is opened up to what you're supposed to be doing, rather than sort of getting closed in by the anxiety and fear that goes on. So thank you for, I know I've learned a lot from all four of you. I hope that everybody that joined us today has as well. A big thank you to Desiree, Kelly, Sarah, and Michelle. And I wanted to, somebody asked earlier to get another look at that, which you can email me at KB as in boy Garner, GARNER @IAMAS, which is IAMAS.com. That's kbgarner@IAMAS.com. And just send me your address and email, and we can work out getting you the card so that you can contact your elected officials. And of course, if you're willing to donate to IAMAS, we'd very much appreciate it, so we can continue doing this work that we do. And that's at our website, which is also IAMAS.com. And I know that all the links that were provided by the various people here will be on Facebook, but are also in the chat box. And I hope to follow up with those as well, because I know that there's even more wisdom and knowledge and good stuff there for all of us who are still, you know, trying to get by day here. So you can follow us on Facebook. I am a feminist mom, same as Twitter. And I wanted to give a quick plug for our next talk, which is more lighthearted, fortunately. So I gotta say, after 3 of these more very serious-minded COVID talks, I was ready for something a little bit more upbeat as well, and funny, as Sarah was saying. So we have Meredith Masonny, who runs That's Inappropriate. She has a blog and she does various viral videos and that sort of thing, but it's also going to have an introduction by Maki Motapaniani. It's quite of a handful of a name there. And she is going to be doing, she works on the topic of comic mothers, and she's coming out with a book on that I think is going to be, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I heard her speak once in Toronto, and she does amazing work as well. So the information is on Facebook for you to register for the next event. And if anybody wants to do a quick last plug for your own work, I'd be happy to do that. Just raise your hand here. You can send out some information. Go ahead.
I just want to say I have a free Peaceful Parenting Facebook group that anyone's welcome to join. It's a really, really lovely group of parents who are non-judgmental and really supportive. And anyone's invited to join. And, you know, if you're struggling, it's a great place to get some virtual community, as Desiree was mentioning, and some support. And I'll just, the name of it is, if you go on Facebook and you search Peaceful Parenting with Sarah Rosensweet, it'll pop up.
Great. Michelle?
I was going to offer my Facebook group as well. It's called the Heart of Educational Psychology, and it's a parent support community as well, where I'm trying to bring parents together, but also offer some of my professional knowledge in a more parent-oriented way. So I'm taking what I talk to teachers about in terms of heart-centeredness and social-emotional learning, and share it with parents through this support community. And I would welcome any and all of you to join us over there.
Fantastic. Desiree, did you want a last plug, or would you rather pass?
I will plug the group that I do every Wednesday from 1 to 2 Eastern Standard Time. Everything's on our Facebook page, the Bloom Collective Baltimore. You do not have to live in Baltimore or Maryland to attend the group. It is free, and we'd be glad to have you.
And Kelly?
I put all of our groups in there. My company, Nurture Me, we have a Facebook page, and then we have 2 groups that were created around the pandemic. So we have Pedagogy of the Pandemic, which is for educators who are also parents. And then we have Pandemic Parenting, which is just for just what it sounds like. And we did that because the people that are in our main group really they wanted to have a space that was COVID free. So our Nurture Me page, we don't talk about anything related to the pandemic or the virus or anything. So if that's a need for anyone, that's a great place to go. We do not mention the C word there at all.
Wonderful. Thank you so, so much, everybody. I am going to end this here, but please continue the conversation on Facebook if you so choose. And I hope everybody has a lovely, peace-filled, grace-filled day.